Have you ever wondered why some business people are more successful than others? Welcome to the Mentor List, a source of sound advice with your host, David Lewis. The Mentor List specialises in interviews with top business minds. Listen to their stories, list their habits, and most importantly, gather their advice for your career. This is the Mentor List.
Hello and welcome to the show. Today we are sitting down and having a chat with Cameron Schwab. Now, Cameron is an experienced CEO, leadership coach, and organisational specialist. He works with boards, CEOs, and exec teams, as well as coaches and coaching teams to build leadership capability, particularly as it relates to organisational performance and transformation. He has been a leader in the dynamic, heavily scrutinised, and multifaceted professional sports industry for over 30 years in the major Australian sporting competition, the Australian Football League. His leadership career commenced at just 20 years of age, overseeing talent identification and player recruitment at the Melbourne Football Club. He was appointed CEO to the Richmond Football Club at just age 24, making him the youngest in the history of the AFL. For the last 25 years, he was CEO of 3 clubs, the Richmond, Melbourne and Fremantle clubs, ranking him in the 8th longest serving CEO in the 150 years of the game. He was also CEO of the AFL's official website, afl.com.au. He holds an MBA and Masters of Marketing from the Melbourne Business School. He's also completed the Advanced Management Program, as well as the Harvard Program of Board Effectiveness at Harvard Business School. He is a Vincent Fairfax Fellow of the Centre of Ethical Leadership at the University of Melbourne. So I caught up with Cameron here in Melbourne at Work Club and certainly love making this recording, so I hope you enjoy today's conversation. So Cameron Schwab, welcome to the Mentor List.
No, it's a great honour, and I've been a listener and pleased to have the opportunity of joining you.
No, it's great to actually have a listener on. It's less prep work for me, and you sort of know the flow of the show, and yeah, so just, do you want to just maybe start off? We'll just tell the listeners where we are.
Yeah, we're at Work Club, and Work Club, it does have the reminiscence of Fight Club, and we don't talk about Work Club. It's a place which is, they've been in Sydney for a few years, but recently come to Melbourne, and I've got to say it's probably had as big an impact on my more recent working life than any other place. It's got the goal of bringing people of not just ambition together, but people of difference together, and I've found there's probably hasn't been a day, I come in here every day, where I haven't enjoyed a conversation or haven't reached for my notebook at some point to write something down from someone who's, I've run into who's also a member here, and highly recommend it. It's early days for it. The attitude of the people here is outstanding, very friendly, very decent, but it's also very productive as well. And so I'd highly recommend it. We're on the corner of Collins and Elizabeth and in the old bank building, and it's beautifully, as you can see from your own observations, it's beautifully fitted out, and I think it does what collaborative workplaces were supposed to do, but just adds a whole bigger dimension to it.
Yeah, and if you can hear that thunder outside, it's the trams or the 109.
It is, yeah. So it's very accessible. Very accessible. All
right, Cam. So, yeah, welcome to the show. And I might start off with just maybe if you can tell the listeners a bit about yourself and your story.
I spent probably the best part of 30 years working in the AFL, of which 25 of them or 24 of them were as a CEO of 3 AFL clubs. In chronological order, Richmond, Melbourne and Fremantle. I actually had a second stint at Melbourne as well. So I was CEO of Melbourne twice, actually sacked by Melbourne twice as CEO. So that might be something a little bit unique.
To that.
But, I was a CEO young. I was 24 when I first was given the role as CEO at Richmond Footy Club in 1988. So what year were you born?
81.
Okay, so you were just a lad when I was CEOing. And that was a great experience, really tough time, very enjoyable. It was going to the club. I grew up as a Richmond supporter. My father, Alan Schwab, was also a football person, and he was the secretary, as they were then called, of the Richmond Footy Club when I was growing up. And he was, during a great success era for Richmond, they were the team of that generation. Unfortunately, the club wasn't in nearly as good shape, some 20 years later. I think it was actually less than 20 years that I was, so Dad finished up in 1976 as general manager of Richmond, and I was appointed in 1988. So it was only, just over 10 years after he finished up in the role that I found myself in the same role.
That's a quick rise to the top, you could say.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, and look, it was, and people have often asked me, was it too early? And clearly it was. There was probably no amount of experience was going to prepare me for the challenge of the job, but I was never made to feel that way, and that was a great credit to the people, particularly the president of the club, a fellow by the name of Neville Crowe, who sadly passed away last year. He was a great mentor of mine and very influential person in my life. And I think even the day that it was announced, he said in the paper that, Cameron's 24 going on 44. And I was thinking to myself, I'm 24 going on about 19 in my own mind. It was an interesting thing. But just the fact that he made me feel that way was a really, probably a form of leadership that I didn't understand at that time nor had respect for in regard to how you are with people and how you relate to people, particularly as it relates to their potential discomforts. And obviously it was a discomfort for me that I was so young in that role. And I was also young looking too. I wasn't someone who, I always joke with people, I don't think I reached puberty till I was 18 or 19. I was clearly young. And it was dealing with people who were my childhood heroes as well. I think I still had duffel coats with the players' numbers on at home. So, and we were coming off the end of an era and going into what was a really tough era, and the club was actually technically bankrupt during that time. So it was challenging at a whole lot of levels.
So do you think it's a disadvantage in your own mind being so young?
Again, I was never made to feel that way, so that was probably important. I wouldn't change the experience for anything, but at the same time, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it as well. And I think when you take on any new role, you don't know what you don't know, and that's a cliche. But at that point, I was probably feeling quite confident because I'd been a part of Melbourne Football Club in the previous generation where I had the great opportunity of working with some outstanding people like Ron Barassi, John Northey, who had recently come over as coach. And we'd gone from being a club that hadn't made the finals for 23 or 24 years, and we made the finals, and we actually got to a grand final in 1988, got beaten badly. And I was the recruiting manager during that period of time. So I was able to bring in enough talent during the first years of drafting, and the game was changing a lot during that period. And so I had a fair degree of confidence in my ability to be quite contemporary in my thinking and be modern in my approach to strategically building a football team, things we probably take for granted now, but at the time were quite new. I was one of the first to get into use of video for selecting players, and that was actually born out of the fact that Melbourne didn't have a lot of money, so I couldn't get on a plane and go and watch games, so I started bringing videos from wherever I could get them from, and we recruited a few players who were a little bit left field, but they went on and had great careers at the club. And so I had at least the confidence of having done something within the game of which I'd seen the outcomes from, and that was a great feeling. But then going into a role where you had to take responsibility for the whole of the organisation, and that was in so many ways a step too far, but at the same time I was very determined to make the most of that opportunity.
Yeah, got it. And when I think about, some of the roles that you've been in, you're sort of wearing two hats around. So it needs to be a sustainable business and so a commercial entity, but then winning on Sunday at all costs. So how do you balance those?
No, it's a great question. And it's probably the most misunderstood question within it all. And you've probably there's three layers of constraints that sporting clubs have. And I think any business always has to have a sense of its own constraints. Not only because of, the obvious notion of, okay, well, that's where our market sits, or that's where our opportunity sits, but it actually forces you to be far more innovative within that constraint. And I'll talk about constraints a little bit later because I think there's some really good learnings within that. And so with a footy club, your constraints are based on, obviously, your location where you are. And if you're in Melbourne, you're one of 10 clubs. If you're in Perth, you're one of 2 clubs with a market to yourself. Your stadium arrangements, and everyone says, well, your Melbourne Footy Club or Richmond Football Club, you play at the MCG, great stadium, there shouldn't be constraints, but it's an unbelievably expensive stadium to play at, because it's built for something other than 25,000 people turning up when you're going no good. And the other one is the constraints which are put on you by the AFL, is in they have player rules, so that restricts the movement of players, but they also distribute a large proportion of your funds as well. And so those 3 layers of constraints affect both your profit model, as in your ability to build a sustainable business, but also affect what we call our premiership model, which is then your capacity to build a football team. Because your profit model obviously funds your football team. Your football team goes well, and then the money, hopefully, you generate, dependent on those constraints, helps you build your business. So it is a very circular area, and it is circular consideration. And don't worry, you can have some really interesting debates as to whether you put on another corporate salesperson or whether you recruit another halfback flanker. It literally can, because the clubs I've gone into, in all cases, were actually at the bottom of the ladder and broke. And so you had to actually, and to give yourself any chance of success, you had to slowly build your profit model, but at the same time, get your side as competitive as you can, as quickly as you can, so you can then create some hope and expectation, particularly on behalf of the supporters who might have been doing it pretty hard up until that point. Yep. And so it gets quite circular, but the good thing is, the CEO, you should be the best person to be able to read that play. And also you should be the person who has the capacity to manage the expectations of what are fundamentally, the one thing about AFL clubs is they don't lack for ambition and they don't lack for A-type personalities. So you're having to build the types of relationships with those people and those personalities to manage expectations, and hopefully you can get everyone pointing in vaguely the same direction.
Yep. Because, I imagine there's many different powerful players within a club or a football club.
Yeah, no, it attracts, really strong personalities. And we always say that the interesting thing, even around board tables, and because it's such a constrained environment, you've got you've got a set of rules which not many people have to deal with, which the AFL impart on you, because they need to do that to create a balanced competition, and that's for the good of the game. And that's been a significant improvement in the sport over the last generation. But at the same time, you'll be saying to people, you could be in a room full of people where every single one of them is used to getting their own way. And to take people from, and even the athletes themselves, the players come in as the best players in their teams. They come in as the local heroes. And so they've come in on the basis of a very selfish, almost indulgent upbringing, where it's about them getting to that opportunity. And then the first value you've got to educate them on is selflessness, and that can be a big challenge. But I think that applies for people sitting around board tables at football clubs and people sitting within administrations and coaching staff, all of them. If you're not prepared to commit to an absolute team ethos, well, you won't win, because there are clubs who are committing to that ethos and they'll just do it better than what you'll do it.
Got it. And you sort of mentioned before the circular motion, and if you're coming into a club that doesn't have that momentum and one thing's not feeding the other, it sounds like you've done it a few times. Was there a one size fits all or a cookie cutter approach that you had that?
No, again, a good question. Look, I think probably because my thinking evolved and also the challenges evolved. But there are times I can look back on my career and say I did my best work and we didn't achieve what we want to do, and other times where you're unjustly enriched, where circumstances worked in your favour. But I think the first thing you try to do as a leader is give a sense of hope. I think, and football clubs more than any other businesses, I think, require that, because the performance of the team has so much, particularly for the supporters, just has so much impact on people's. Put it this way, you can't demand a passion for your club and a love of your club and then be disappointed when it doesn't live up to the expectations of that love and passion. It's like a breakup of any type of relationship. That's why it hurts you most, because you love it most. And football clubs are very much call on a strong emotional commitment from many thousands of people. So the first thing you've got to do is try and give a sense of hope, but the hope has to be real. The energy generally comes within any organisation from what you're achieving now or what you genuinely believe you can achieve in the future. And some people would say that's a vision, and perhaps it is, but I see it more as just you need hope. And if you can't lay that pathway to hope when you're not going to win now, and it's unlikely that you're going to have many wins in the next few years, particularly for the people who are closest to that process, well, you probably failed as a CEO in that situation. Going into an organisation tomorrow, I would still take that approach with me. And so you'd have to find the things that would actually create that expectation. And can I give you an example of one of those?
Yeah, that'd be great.
I was appointed CEO of Fremantle Football Club in 2001, and I think I was mainly appointed because no one else wanted it. And it was, the club was $8 million in debt. It was last on the ladder, won 2 games, had lost 17 games in a row, and the coach had been sacked during the year, and Sean McManus was the captain. He'd stepped aside as captain, and when about 3 weeks after I arrived, and I was there on my own, my family hadn't come over yet, the president of the club actually resigned from his role, and 3 or 4 board members also resigned. And they were the very people who'd actually appointed me into the job. And so we're getting a whole new board, basically, and a new president. And so the board was being criticised for a whole range of decisions that it had taken in the previous time, as is the want of the local or any sporting media. And I was actually part of that criticism, and I'd been in the job for 3 weeks. So I was actually, they were criticising my appointment. And I remember ringing my wife saying, this just might be too hard. This just might be the right thing for us, And I know you've asked for a quote, so I'm going to roll it out early. Okay. And Alan Jeans, the famous Hawthorn coach who I worked with for 1 year at Richmond, used to say, your first loss is your best loss, as in if it's not going to work, face up to your situation, deal with your situation and give yourself the opportunity of moving on. And that quote was sort of ringing in my ears as I'm weighing up where I'm at, as I'm staying at the Esplanade Hotel in Fremantle with no friends, no board, no captain, no coach, no anyone, reading the newspaper that I'm no good. So I actually had with me a report which was conducted when Fremantle first came into the competition. The club had never finished higher than 12th on the ladder until that point. And the original report and all the thinking behind it, I'd worked out all of those conditions still actually existed. They were still there. They weren't wrong. The club hadn't been successful, but it wasn't for the reasons that the thing couldn't be successful. And so immediately the thought came to mind was that the city of Fremantle, which had this famous sporting tradition and a great football tradition, which was probably mainly known within WA at that stage, just hadn't expressed itself through its new incarnation, being the Fremantle Dockers. And so I started to focus immediately on the very things that made Fremantle football great. And part of that was embracing the people who'd made Fremantle football great. It was embracing, there was a certain ethos that Fremantle people expected. And I think I understood that, even though I was from Victoria. And I think it went back to my recruiting days where I'd go over and watch the local, East Fremantle, South Fremantle games, and they were always fantastic games, the derbies. And I just kept reflecting on those things. I thought, no, that'll be the card I'll play early, that we will be the team for Fremantle. And part of that was actually also made a commitment that we would give and reward those people as quickly as we could. And with the support of the coach, we said that we're going to win games at home. We had our best chance of winning games at home, even if it meant playing lesser teams when we played away, but just always make our home games memorable for the people there. And in the first year we were there, so 2002, we won 9 games at home, didn't win any away. But if you're watching Fremantle and you're going to watch the games in your local environment and you get the experience of seeing your team win and going home and having a drink with your mates and and talking about it during the course of the week, it was 9 of the 12 games that we had at Subiaco Oval. And then that's when the hope kicked in. And we also had, it was Matthew Pavlich was emerging, Jeff Farmer we'd recruited. He was another player we recruited basically to bring hope to the organisation because he was such an exciting player. And Luke McFarlane, also Trent Crowe, who didn't work out, but all of a sudden there was some hope. So being able to talk about it and then back it up as quickly as you possibly can was really important. And a momentum developed from there. And it ended up being, I think, the best 7 years of my working life, from a period where literally I was telling the family just to hold off before we shift. That's how quickly it came.
So just going back to, I guess, that decision, and you're obviously questioning it. How did you get yourself in that position? Because you mentioned that, you started at a CEO role. And is that just the natural progression, or is that you thinking that, okay, I'll go and be the CEO in the worst performing club and can't get much harder?
I was mentioning to you before about how I did this gifts analysis, and one of the gifts I had was the gift of mercy. And so my wife often has said to me, why are you always saving things? And I was totally unaware of it, but I think there is a great attraction of going into an environment where it might be seen externally as being in crisis, but you're seen as part of the new wave and you get to lead that new wave. The one thing is, if you're in crisis, people are up for the conversation about change. So you at least have that, but you do have to make progress quickly. You can't bounce back into crisis. And probably when I reflect back on my last time as a CEO, is we reverted back to crisis too often, and for a whole variety of reasons. But we weren't. Whereas at Fremantle, we were able to get some momentum and maintain. There was a couple of years where we perhaps could have played a bit better, but what it actually did though was it created another scenario for us, is that the expectation of the team actually was jumped well ahead of capability. And the danger in doing that is you start, without knowing it, over-promising. And it's no different to me saying this will be the best movie you've ever seen, or this is going to be the best book you've ever read. And you're 25 pages in thinking, why has he recommended this? That's that same sense of it. And we probably had a couple of years where we didn't perform we performed to our own expectations, but we didn't perform to the external expectations, and that put a bit of pressure on us. So I think I enjoy the notion of going into organisations which are struggling. I like being the person who can perhaps generate some of that hope, but at the same time get together, a really strong team to lead it and be a part of it. And I think that's an exciting part of it. And what it means probably is very rarely do you get to see it through. I've got my career's probably spent a lot more time losing than winning because of the circumstances by which I started. And losing is the hardest part of sport. As much as you get better at reconciling both the winning and losing as you get older, it still is hard. When you're watching your team getting banged up because you're not quite ready for it, and you understand the desolation that can actually create for people, and that's still a tough part of the job.
Yeah, sure, I can imagine. Okay, so just another question now. I see I keep reverting back to it, starting as the CEO. But you've gone back to school as well, and at some point. So what was the thinking?
When I went to school, I didn't have a clear ambition, but probably it was to do art. I always enjoyed art. My mum's an artist, and I was the kid in the class who could draw a bit. So I always thought that I could do art. And then in the time when I was at school, it was the thing that I thought I was quite good at with art. Became really quite unfashionable, which was being able to draw. Because why do you need to be able to draw? Because we can take photographs of things. And so it became quite unfashionable during that period. And quite ironically, in a time with a lot more digital and a lot more means by which we can replicate things, drawing's actually really a big thing again. It's almost seen as a fundamental. So I didn't do that well in art in my last year at school. So that probably threw my whole ambition of going to study art beyond school. And my dad worked in footy. I thought I was just going to get a job in a clerical role or something like that. And then I ended up as the office boy at the Melbourne Footy Club, mainly because my surname was Schwab, and Dad was well-known and well-respected person. And then 6 years later, I'm a general manager of a footy club. And then 7 years or 6 years later, I'm out of work. My time had come. And I hadn't done one accounting subject at school. I'd never done a business subject at school. I'd never done anything like that. So I did an advanced management program at Melbourne Business School, and it just opened my eyes to the fact that I could actually compete at that level with people who had gone through all of that formal education. And also then I worked out that there was a possibility, given that I'd already been a CEO to that point, that I could actually probably talk my way into an MBA. So I went straight into an MBA without a first degree. And I did the executive MBA at the Melbourne Business School, one where you had to live in for fair parts of the year, and it was a life-changing experience. And it probably set me on a pathway of learning in both a formal and informal sense that I'd like to think that I've maintained ever since. And I was always a good reader, I always read a lot, but that time I realised that there was a way of directing your thinking and your activities and all of a sudden I got really full on into, I love strategy, like I'm full on into strategy. And I think back now that even when I was trying to develop footy teams at Melbourne Footy Club, that strategy was a big part of it, setting up models and frameworks to recruit players into, rather than just do a whole lot of players and hope that they'd be okay. And then probably further on, I got much more into the cultural stuff. So then I went back and I also did the MBA. Then I thought I'd hang in there, and I still didn't have a specialist area beyond being a footy administrator. And I was thinking, well, I mightn't be that because I've already had my life job, and I'm 31 or 32. So I did the marketing masters as well, which I got a lot out of as well. So I did the two master's degrees in really short time, and then I set about getting myself back into the workforce. But it was a life-changing experience. And it was that which actually led me, many years later, I did the advanced management program at Harvard Business School and did the coaching accreditation at Columbia Business School in New York. So all of it stemmed from an experience at the Melbourne Business School, yeah.
And so it sort of put you on a path where you've haven't had that traditional university and then your second course, and now you're obviously
I'm doing my first uni now. Because I've actually last year I did first year fine arts at the Victorian College of the Arts. So I went back to uni. I'm like a tribal elder, at the Victorian College of the Arts. So I've probably gone back to, in some ways, doing what I thought I might have been doing at 18 years of age. I'm doing in my 50s.
So you're doing the drawing?
Draw. But actually, a lot of it's digital drawing. So it's mainly portraiture and figurative work. I do a lot with, just actually do a fair bit with homeless guys in the CBD and get to know them and talk to them and ask if I can draw them. I've got a few things up on LinkedIn. Different times I put some of my drawings. I grew up drawing superheroes and footballers and all that sort of stuff. So the figurative stuff was always probably the fascination. One of the things I always recommend as part of my coaching is to find a creative space for anyone. And I had that conversation recently with Kevin Sheedy, and I'm thinking, I've known this guy for 40 years, but I don't know what his creative space is. And his eyes lit up, and he grabbed his phone and he started showing me photos of his garden. He's a canny sort of fella, Sheeds, and he probably bought acres of park orchards for about $1.50 an acre back in the day, and he's built this garden, and it's unbelievable. And he was telling me about certain times of year where certain plants grow, and this will grow here. It looks a bit bare at the moment. This will bear fruit. This will come out. But he was into it big time, and he then started talking about, and I do my best thinking there. He said, I've picked premiership teams in that garden, and looking at me sideways. I've picked premiership, and he said it about 3 times just to make sure that I got hold of it. And so it was actually quite, because I've been saying it all this time. You've got to find a creative space, because I knew that worked for me, but to have someone who, to the outside world, no one would know that, and he would have had 1,000 photos of his garden on his phone.
Yeah, but what a great place. Well, is obviously can go there and have all the noise just gone and just think. And I imagine your drawing's a similar process to.
It is. Yeah. The interesting thing was actually then doing art as something other than an escape, as in with an expectation associated with it. It then added a different pressure. So, and I wonder whether I enjoy it as much now because I've got an expectation of myself as compared with something which was a bit of an escape. And so if it does become that, if it becomes the thing that I'm going to do more and more of, and I do have an expectation, well, my challenge then is, okay, there's lots of creative spaces out there, so go and find yourself another one. You're not restricted to one. And when I tell people I do speaking work, I'll explain that to people, and straight away, that's almost the thing which resonates most with them, where they go, where's mine? And they think of it mainly in terms of a creative endeavour, as in we traditionally know creative, whether I draw or Sheeds' garden or something similar. For some people I've worked out it's going for a walk, or it's, listening to audibles or podcasts, or, there's however many different versions of it, but I still find it. And the other interesting thing I found about the art world was that they're well ahead of the business world, because when I got there, the words like identity and the notion of storytelling and purpose and these things have been part of the art world forever. We've only just started to bring them into part of our consideration in the corporate or the sporting world. It's a fairly recent part of our language. Well, it's been part of the art world's language forever. And even when you think you're going into something different, you realise that there's some things which bind us which are really quite powerful. And art's got that, and it's got that in abundance. And that was a beautiful thing to be a part of.
Great. Fantastic. It's probably a nice segue into, I just had a note here to ask you about finding something.
Oh, yeah. The term finding something?
Yeah. So I sort of picked that up when I was doing a bit of research. Maybe elaborate.
And there's a bit of a story behind it. I was sacked as CEO of Melbourne in the late 90s. It was basically through the club had almost merged in 1996 with Hawthorn, and Melbourne supporters in fact voted to merge, but Hawthorn supporters voted against the merge, and it, 2 parties to tango type thing, and so it didn't happen. And Hawthorn's response to that was a total rebuild of their footy club. And Hawthorn had been a successful club not long before. They'd won the premiership only 5 years earlier, so it was a big fall from grace for them, whereas Melbourne hadn't won one since 1964. Melbourne was seen as the stronger partner within the merger, which was quite interesting when you think of what's actually happened. And that was one of the reasons why Hawthorn fought against it, because the merger in terms of how you view it, clearly favoured Melbourne. It was basically a Melbourne jumper, and Don Scott famously stood up with a Melbourne jumper and pulled the hawk off the front of it, and it's a Velcro hawk and all this stuff. It was a really very powerful imagery. And so Hawthorn voted against it. Well, I was appointed CEO not long after that merge. So the club was a very fragmented and dislocated club. In fact, the board was made up of pro-merger and anti-merger people who were trying to get on. where they'd actually stood. It'd be like putting Labor and Liberal together. It just was not going to happen in its own way. And I become the CEO. The next year we finish on the bottom, 1997, unsurprisingly. But the year after, we got to a preliminary final. And I think it's the biggest movement up the ladder in the history of the game. And we'd appointed Neil Danaher as coach. We'd changed a few things, but we'd also got on the end of the last part of some great players, as in they had very good seasons at the very end of their careers, and then they dropped off the next year. So it's guys like Todd Viney, Jim Steins, Gary Lyon, David Schwartz come back from knee injuries. These were terrific Melbourne players. And we made it to a preliminary final, and we actually beat Adelaide in the finals that year, who went on and won the grand final. So it was a very good year for us, but it set massive expectation. The next year, we dropped off, and we were a mid-range team, but we also had a controversy that the club had actually been paying outside of the salary cap for about the previous 10 years, and I'm the CEO. And so there was a whole lot of conjecture about as it related to blame, and it basically, again, fragmented very quickly, quite a fragmented club. The president of the club is a fellow by the name of Joe Gutnick. Fair to say I didn't have a great relationship with Joe, and I ended up getting sacked as CEO. And it was sacked in a really bad way. I basically found out about it via the media.
So you're watching it on TV or you're reading it?
No, basically almost it was in the papers the next day, after the decision's made. And so, like most I was in my mid-30s, and like a lot of men, I was pretty much aligning who I was to what I did. And I'd been a CEO, and I saw it as it was my second go as a CEO, and it was just a very, very difficult period of life, and I didn't respond to it in any positive way. It was it was a pretty dark period, and I isolated myself in lots of ways. But there was one person who I would talk to and continued to talk to regularly was Alan Jeans, and Alan Jeans. We only worked together for 1 year. It was a tough year, but we got close, and Alan he signed a 4-year contract, but due to health issues, mainly anxiety, which was incredible for a guy who coached, that amount. He coached 700 or 800 games, I think, at that point. But we worked really closely together to get through the year, and I think laid the foundations in lots of ways. John Northey then came in as coach the next year, made the finals a couple of years later. So I think a lot of the foundations were laid during that period of time for what was not a great era for Richmond, but certainly an improved era. And Alan kept ringing me, and it was one of the only phone calls that I take regularly. And he invited me he was inducting Dermot Brereton into the AFL Hall of Fame. I think it was this year. I can't remember the exact timing of it. And I went along as his guest to the function. I didn't feel comfortable at all being there. I basically hadn't worked for the previous 8 or 9 months. And as he was inducting Dermot into the Hall of Fame, there's this vision of Dermot picking himself up the 1989 grand final, and he was clearly in a lot of pain. Mark Yates had fixed him up at the start of the game in a way which was probably 6 or 8 weeks now, but was totally okay at the time. And Dermot was the warrior, and the warrior went down. And as this vision is being shown, Alan Jeans is saying, it's not how you go down, it's how you get up. It's not how you get knocked down, it's how you get up. And as he's saying it, he started looking towards me, and I'm sitting, and he was looking right at me, and he was saying, it's not how you get knocked down, it's how you get up. And he's got this very powerful way of saying it. And then the voice went right up. It's not how you get knocked down, it's how you get up. And then he whispered it one more time, to the point where almost people were sort of looking towards me, because it was clear that he was talking to me. And I wrote, it's not how you get knocked down, it's how you get up, on the back of my name tag. And it got me going again in life. I started doing something about getting myself out of a place that I'd allowed myself to get into. And I started writing the word finding something on my notebook. And I still write it every day. I've got a notebook here, finding something. I still write down every day of my life on the top of my notebook with a few words which now for me define what finding something actually is. And when I give talks now, I start with the term finding something. And then as the talk evolves, I tell that story. And to me, it was an unbelievable piece of friendship. He was a lot older than me, but it was an amazing piece of leadership too, to think that he could, to have the wherefore to think, well, I'll invite Cameron along to this function, and because I think he'll be really inspired by what I've got to say. And he was such a humble person anyway that he would never necessarily seen himself in that way. But it had a profound effect on my life and probably changed my life in lots of ways. I'm not sure how it would have played out had it not been for that moment.
Fantastic. I'm really glad I
That's that question.
I asked you that question. Fantastic. Thanks for sharing. Okay, so God, that's almost advice for yourself, but I did have that question to ask, but you've kind of covered it in many ways. But if you had to get some advice or you had some advice along your way, what could you share with the listeners?
I'm not great at advice, probably because I gave away too much of it without knowing where it perhaps came from too much of what I wanted or what I needed, whether it be ego or whether it be being a CEO of a footy club and wanting what you want. So probably an interesting thing was when I did the coaching program at Columbia a few years ago, I worked out that was probably the thing I should have done right at the start. That it was about how, and I always felt that the people who I cared for cared back, but what I actually worked out was there was not just a want that was required to get closer to understand people, but there was actually a means by which you could actually do it, and it's probably led in some ways to the business that I'm now developing, which is how CEOs as the central figure in any organisation, build and create trust. But if you don't trust yourself at a fundamental level, you've got no means by which you can give trust. And to feel trust as a CEO is I think the most challenging part of the job. As in feel trust from other people, but feel as though you are actually the person who can do what this organisation needs now. And I think to do that, so I write down on the top of my book, my little finding something, but I write down 5 things every day. And it's number 1 is to do good work. If I do good work, and people say do outstanding work, do great work, I think if you consistently are setting yourself to do good work, well, the chances are you're going to produce some great work from time to time. But you also know that it's going to get a bit average. You might just miss the dartboard. But if you say just do good work, and that's just, and some say it's not ambitious enough, it's not, no, but for me, it comes back to this notion that if someone who you work with, and I said, tell me what type of person they were, and so he's a really good person. Well, that's a really lofty standard, I think, to be known as a good person. The second point is to stay organised. I write the word stay organised. And stay organised I think disorganised people get CEO sacked, I think. And if you're a disorganised CEO, you get sacked. But it's also more than just your physical means by which you're organising yourself, but how you actually organise your thinking, how you allow yourself to stay organised in your thinking. Because there's so many distractions, so much information, so much knowledge, so much going on. And particularly in a CEO role, you don't want for advice. You're going to get a lot of people wanting to talk to you, and they're going to come from whatever position, well-meaning or otherwise, in regard to it. So how do you stay organised in your own thinking? My third one is to be present with family and friends. And to be present, and I think I've always been there and available, I think most times, even in the context of the role I played. But I would question whether I've been present enough, and in a true sense that my mind was thinking about whatever the challenges of my job was rather than what the challenges of my children were. And when I reflect on that, I go, well, how would you ever think that the priority was right? And clearly they're not, but there is something immediate and demanding about your work. Whereas you're always thinking your family is there and long term, but that by its very nature could mean you take it for granted. The fourth one is enjoy and look after myself, and that takes some doing, because at different times, actually just being happy in a role which is very demanding of you can be testing. And also, obviously, you don't look after yourself. So you've got to come up with a means by which you look after yourself. And for me, that's really only emerged in the last few years. And it's through, I swim every morning or I ride every morning. But I try and do it with some intensity as well, not just falling in a pool. I do fall in the pool to start off with, but yeah, I do it in a squad. So it tests you out a little bit each time. And that's been a really powerful thing for me. And I think, I've been lucky that I've had relatively good health all my life, but I think that will be the thing that will keep me going. And the fifth one is find a creative space. So that's which I've spoken about previously. So it's do good work, stay organised, be present with family and friends, enjoy and look after myself, and find a creative space. And by writing them down, it just restarts my day each day. And also, interesting, because I do it in a moleskin or however it's pronounced now, and I had a date stamp made up, so each day, because I don't know what notes I'm going to end up taking. So I stamped the date, and there might be 20 pages of notes. Whereas if you restrict yourself to a diary, you're constraining yourself. Whereas I might be in a discussion or I'm reading a book and I just want to write a whole lot of notes about it, and I've got good reference on those things. And I've got 15 or 20 years of these books now.
Oh, you keep them all?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. There'll be good evidence of some pretty bad decisions at different times.
Got a whole lot.
I have, yeah. Well, there's some that I look back on I wouldn't want to open, I can assure you. That was a bad couple of months, that one. Yeah, so wouldn't do that.
So you've always had this practice of keeping free-form notes and...
Yeah. And I'm right into my technology, but I think there's something tactile about decent quality paper, nice pen, I use the pen that I actually gave to my dad for his 50th birthday. It's disappeared at different times and found itself again, which has been great, so I'm quite protective of it. I think there's something tactile about it. It might be the creative side of me, but I still have all my electronic stuff and all those, but just to write down what's happening in your days.
Yeah. And when are you writing this? Is this sort of first thing when you get up?
First thing when I just either arrive at work or before I leave to come to work, So it's only a 10-minute exercise. Yeah.
And it's just a reminder of those 5 things. And
And it's sometimes I'll be writing down, gee, I haven't spoken to Mum for a while. There'll be something like that that'll come to mind. I wonder how Jen went with that. My sister went with that. I wonder how my brother lives in Switzerland. Gee, I haven't caught up with you. That's that type of stuff which just comes to mind when reading it.
Right.
Writing it.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for sharing. My next question was actually going to be, what habits would you like to share? But
they're probably built around those in lots of ways. Yeah, I think that there's a guy by the name of David White who's a poet. He writes some really interesting stuff, Whyte, I think, from memory. And he used the term, he said, a poet would never use the word balance because it's too obvious and therefore untrustworthy. And this notion that somehow we're ever going to have our life it's going to find some perfect balance, I think is a goal and an objective that is just not achievable. And because ambitious people who say want to be all of the things I talked about before, they're going to find that the family thing will demand something of them which will throw the other thing. It always just will because life's so unpredictable. And if you've got an energy towards doing most things well, how are you going to actually find that? And he actually breaks his into, he calls it the 3 marriages. He talks about, the obvious marriage as in the one that we proclaim and we make an obvious vow to another person, which we recognise and understand as being a marriage, although that's, quite a controversial topic, which, I've got very strong views on in terms of that should be something which is open to everyone, in that sense. Then you've got, the marriage to what you do or, as in the thing that you love to do in your life and mainly for that. And that's, in most people, some form of work or some sort of something that they're chasing or wanting to be good at or wanting to, and then, the other one is, the marriage to self, as in the notion of how you develop your person. And I always felt that I'd get to this stage of life that somehow I'd half know everything, and always just amazed at how little you know and how the learning thing just keeps going and you find a clarity in something that you thought that you knew everything about. And that is the same feeling. It's even probably a better feeling to find that at this stage of life than it was when someone was explaining something really cool, or Ron Barassi was telling me about something when I was 19 or 20 years of age, that I find it even a cooler thing to experience now than I did even then, because you've got so much more context to what it actually means and how much benefit it can actually bring.
Fantastic. Okay, so we've had the quote come out of the bag early. There was just a book. There's a book that you recommend someone.
Yeah, I love the book Legacy, and Legacy it's fundamentally about the All Blacks, the New Zealand All Blacks. You don't have to have an interest or a passion for sport to get an enormous amount from it. And the story I love from it is that there's a saying with the All Blacks which they call sweep the sheds, and it's something which it shows you sometimes that the best purpose statements or cultural statements or actually come and grow quite organically, and this one's certainly one of those examples. And what it is that it's an exercise in humility, and the players stay behind after the matches, the games, do all the things they have to do after the game, whether it's their warm down, media commitments, family, all the things that can happen in a game or a test match particularly, where there's lots of expectations. But the players, everyone else leaves the change rooms and the players clean up the change rooms, and they do it together. And this is seriously clean it up. They don't, it's got to be done to a standard that they would expect, And so they've created the mess on the day, so they clean up the mess. And it's this, as I said, the whole thing about humility that, okay, you're an All Black. And to be, I doubt whether there's any sporting team in the world plays with as much expectation as what the New Zealand All Blacks do. Probably, the Brazilian football team probably would. There's probably other teams which represent countries in places where they, genuinely, the game is a culture. But rugby in New Zealand is just so strong. And they're very powerful and they're very good. So therefore you could easily get caught up in your own ego when you get to play in this great side. But this is about just bringing your reality back and also recognise, and it gives them also a chance that they spend that time together, which is very difficult. You'd think that footy teams and sporting teams would do that all the time. And I'd say it's the same as corporations. People think that CEOs and their people who work for them are going to spend a lot of time together. My experience is they spend unbelievably small amounts of time together. And so how they maintain connection is critical, and this is one of the means by which the All Blacks actually do it. So the book's called Legacy. It's pretty freely available. You'll be able to get it online or obviously at Dymocks. And to the point where I've probably bought 80 copies of it, I reckon, and just give it to people.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, okay, so you really...
I'm into it. And it is about, and I'd say that, because when I talk about trust and CEOs, that if you become the CEO, we need to trust you personally, as in your integrity and your intent and your motivation, all the sort of the obvious things that which people think about trust as being. But we also trust you with the culture. We trust you with the strategy. We trust you with the systems, and we trust you with everyone else who actually works for the organisation as well. And so one of the number one capabilities I think any organisation has to have, and almost set it itself as a strategic objective, is can we actually be good at trust? Can we put it in? Everyone says, okay, what are the critical elements of performance? Well, trust has got to sit there right at the very top. But I'm yet to see it in a strategy. Let's be good at trust, and then have a plan to be good at trust. These are the things we have to do. We'll allow ourselves to get distracted on a whole lot of things which are not nearly as important. What we tend to do is we go straight to the organisational and the systems side of trust, as in governance frameworks and structures and all that. But if you're actually culturally not in that place, well, it doesn't matter what rules you've got, And I've sat on those, those situations where it has been up for grabs, and you never feel more compromised in your life when you feel as though you haven't, as a CEO, set that tone, and you reflect on it and say, okay, when should I have done it? And the cavalry ain't coming over the hill to create it. It's actually up to me to do that. Yep. So I would say almost the number one capability a CEO needs to have is, can they establish trust within their organisation? And that obviously then extends to trusted by the board, trusted by the key people, and in lots of cases trusted by your market and trusted by your customers, such as that. Yeah.
And it's probably a good segue into what you're sort of doing now. Did you want to?
Yeah, well, it's probably that. I'm going to be doing workshops with CEOs. I basically set myself, there was two reflections. Firstly, how come I'd been in organisations where I had that, and then applied similar, you asked the question before, but similar sort of approaches, but probably more developed in lots of ways because you had the experience of whatever the last gig was going into that job, and how come I was in situations where it didn't apply? And the interesting one was the Fremantle example I gave you before, where it actually happened quite quickly, where we were able to wear through some very difficult phases because we had this really strong connection. And the connection was almost by accident. The connection came about by virtue of the fact that we were a travelling team. So the president who then gets appointed after the previous president went, his name's Rick Hart, who's a terrific guy and also a very personable person. We would sit next to each other for 4 hours on a plane, 10 or 15 times a year. To and back. So you're probably spending, like in a weekend, you could spend 8, 10, 12 hours together. Well, it just, you sort of get sick of each other probably, but you develop the type of relationship which is in fact very important. And during the course of a year, a lot of other directors would travel. You're obviously travelling with the team. The coach would be part of it, assistant coaches. So you just got a chance, even if you weren't going any good, just to batten down the hatches at different times, or to reflect in a meaningful way on whether that performance was acceptable or not acceptable, what was our expectation. So you just had these really good quality conversations. I then go to Melbourne, a club that I'd actually been to twice. I knew my way around. The president of the club I know well. Sadly, Jim Steins got very ill, so we didn't get the opportunity of really working for a long time together without his unbelievable fight for survival in lots of ways. But for some reason didn't actually ever achieve that level of trust. And there could be a whole lot of reasons that we lay blame at. But I get moved on in the end because of my inability to create trust. And I totally get that. If I was the board, I would have moved me on as well. They might say, oh, he's capable, he's experienced, he's worked, but he hasn't done what is a fundamental thing, within the organisation. So again, it came down to the notion of connection, and it might have been a distraction. There might have been a whole lot of reasons for it, but that was my fundamental responsibility. So I set myself to say, okay, what would the course look like that I would have done to equip me in that way, to be good at trust? So, my goal is to be good at that. My vision is to be good at that. But vision without action is just a dream in the end. So I've just basically set myself to try and put together 2-day workshops exclusively for CEOs and CEO designates on how they develop trust at a personal level, by understanding themselves and how they're likely to lead, how they develop trust culturally and strategically. So I call them the assets of trust. And then what potentially are the enemies of trust are sort of incongruent processes, incongruent systems, incongruent people. They're your assets of trust. And then finish it off with what I'd call in the architecture of CEO trust, which is then a plan. And the view is that it should be something which can work with whatever they've got within their organisation now. That if they do the workshop I'm looking at sort of a Friday, Saturday type scenario, that they can walk into work on Monday with a means by which that can actually happen, but do it in a way where people aren't going to be thinking, gee, this is a whole lot of change here. This is a whole new thing. It shouldn't, because it's got to align with whatever the current purpose, strategy, culture of the organisation is. It's just making sure, I ask CEOs the question, say, okay, if I actually asked you, how do you want your people to feel about you? And I go, do you want to be loved? They go, oh, no, don't like the sound of that. Do you want to be liked? And they go, oh, yeah, no, I want to be respected. It's almost immediate. No, I want to be respected. It's almost like this thing that we've got to respond to. And I say, I reckon you want to be trusted. And I think respect is a subset of that, but you want to be trusted. And so that's personal. We trust you personally as in you're a good person, but we trust your capability to create a trusting organisation, So it's a 2-day workshop, with a view of trying to help CEOs establish and develop that. And I think Malcolm Gladwell sort of popularised the 10,000 hours thing, and I think I've done 82,000 hours as a CEO. So probably, I've got enough war stories to back up most scenarios. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic. I'll be sure to put links to where people can sort of sign up.
Yeah, so I'm probably a few weeks away yet, but I'll certainly make it known. And that's what I'm looking to do. Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah. Thank you very much. I know there's many more war stories. I didn't want to jump in. I was just enjoying listening to the stories. I'm glad you liked it. And I can tell you've got another episode left in you. Or
I hope so.
But yeah, thanks for sharing with everyone today. And for everyone listening in, I hope you've enjoyed, and tune in again next week for another great show.
That's cool. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Cam.
Thank you for listening to The Mentor List with your host, David Lewis. If you like what you're hearing on The Mentor List, the best way to support the show is to take just a few seconds to leave a rating and comment over on iTunes. You can also find further information about this show and links to further episodes at www.mentorlist.com.au. Until next time, this is The Mentor List.